Yes, people, welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to talk about what seems to be a very popular debate at the minute, and it's quite an accurate one to be having, because it's not just a headache that Michael Carrick and the players will have, but it will also be one that the fans will have in terms of predicting or trying to formulate what they think United's best attacking three. I put attacking three, but realistically it's a quartet when you include the number 10 that will be played in this 4-2-3-1 Michael Carrick system. And obviously his tenure is about to begin in one of the biggest games it could possibly begin in, which is Manchester City. I'd say Liverpool's probably borderline a bigger game, but you could argue either or. And with the composition of the personnel that we have in attacking areas, I'd even put Xerxes in a thumbnail, but he looks like he'll still be here because Daniel Marley went to Roma. Seems like we are going to keep Xerxes instead. And you're looking at it and you're thinking, what actually is Manchester United's best attacking front three? What's the most potent? What's the most balanced? Because we have no players in our attacking options that are similar in any way. They're all different profiles of players. They've all got different weaknesses and different strengths. And because it seems to be such an all-encompassing group where you basically have every attribute covered, more or less, when you're trying to fit into a front three to make it all work, it actually makes it a bit of an interesting debate to have, because there's nothing wrong with strength in depth. There's nothing wrong with options. And I think at United, we sometimes forget that, especially when we're having discourse between fans. We're like, oh, where's this person going to play? Oh, when's this person going to play? And it does feel like we have this sort of allergy when it comes to depth in positions, which is something that becomes increasingly important the more competitions you're playing in. Obviously, you've seen an increase in injuries in football these days. The intensity and the physicality that each match demands is different from in past eras. But with United, it's a bit more of a harsher conversation, because you've got a lot of egos, a lot of players on big money and players with decent reputations playing in a team that's not exactly consistent or have players that cement themselves in starting 11s week in, week out. You could pretty much argue to rotate any player any given week, apart from the likes of Bruno Fernandes. And even he has deterrers or people that are not always upset with him. Not upset with him, but not always happy with him. So this is something I've been picking my brain about, and I've seen people been talking about it as well. And I thought, you know what, let me go through it and try and talk about it myself and probably formulate some sort of opinion where I think different from threes, but the one that I feel like excites me the most. Based on performance as well now, which is always a massive factor. You know, momentum in sport and confidence is so big, especially when it comes to attacking players. And it took me a little bit of a while to think about it, because things change. Like, if you asked me this a month and a half ago, there might have been certain players that I wouldn't have put in it and different players that I would. But going forward, especially when we are basically being quite predictive, because we haven't seen how Michael Carrick plays, how Manchester United's Michael Carrick looks like, and what the iteration will look like in terms of how we actually attack, build up. What will our box occupation be like? What will our final third link-up play be like? What zones will players be in? I'm thinking it's going to be difficult, because we have two right wingers in the team, right? Could even say Dorgu's one, maybe like slightly pseudo, but Mbeumo and Ahmad have been two of our better performers this season for the most part. I think Mbeumo had a bit of a poor run going into the AFCON. I don't know if that kind of took his focus away, or whether it was just the underperformance of the squad or reverting back to the mean. But for the large part of the start of his career at Manchester United, he's been probably someone that would have been kind of vying for being player of the season before he went on that dip. And you know, he's an output machine. He's our top scorer still. 6 goals in the league. Got a couple of assists as well. Usually he racks them up a little bit more because he's so good on set pieces. I should see that increase as well with Sesko actually getting a lot more time on the pitch and you've seen a box threat that he's become. But you've got Amad Diallo as well. You could fit them both in Amarim's system, but now when you are only playing with one right-sided forward or winger and there's no wing-back, things become a little bit more difficult in terms of the composition of that attack, because Amad's been playing really well as well. He did the reverse. He was actually getting better and better each game, and we know his importance. And then he went to Ivory Coast, and I know they've been knocked out, but he was borderline player of the competition. Getting back-to-back man-of-the-match performances, being incredible in that advanced right-wing position, cutting in, scoring, creating, being that 1v1 threat that he's become as well, one of the better dribblers, I think, in the league. That comes to ball carrying, but he's also got a little bit more explosive and dynamic with his 1v1 attacking ability. So United have a front three where the right winger side is quite stacked. And United have their two best performing wingers vying for the same position. And it makes it confusing about which one you go with, because if you want to get one or the other in, then you're going to have them playing on the other side on the left wing, which isn't as natural to them. And that brings me to talk about the left side now. So you've got Matheus Cunha, left wing option, and Mason Mount, left wing option. And I say the term left wing very loosely, because if I'm going to be honest, I'm going to sit out here and say it. Neither of those two players are left wingers. Not really in a 4-2-3-1 either. They're both not width holders. They don't hold the touchline. They aren't 1v1 threats in a sense. Cunha is one of those, he's different. It's the likes of, like Kudus is similar and Morgan Rogers, where they are strong 1v1 dribblers, but it's more ball carrying dribbling. It's different. There's a difference between being a strong central ball carrier and someone that can basically isolate someone out wide, stand them up and beat them. That's different. It's a different skill set. It's a different ability. And I think Cunha more fits the carrying the ball, kind of floating, driving through the middle, beating people with power but from angles rather than setting someone up 1v1. And I think that is a much more, the way that Amad is a 1v1 dribbler and the likes of Jeremy Doku, who is probably the best one. It's a much more difficult, as a winger myself, it's more difficult to beat someone, a fullback out wide, in isolation when you stood them up 1v1 than when you're driving in central areas and carrying the ball past people. It is different. And it is a lot more difficult as well. But I don't think Cunha or Mount are natural to be in left wingers. Cunha gets frustrated out there. He wants to roam. Wants to be a bit of a false nine, but not be a focal point. I think you're starting to see why Cunha hasn't succeeded at a big club before, especially at that poor run at Atletico Madrid. He strikes me as an extremely talented player, maturing on his day, maverick, got tons of ability. But his play style and his position dependency isn't as scalable to a top team as the likes of Mbeumo, who doesn't look as pretty on the eye and aesthetic. And I used to think that, but to be fair, I think Cunha can be a bit of an eyesore sometimes as well with his first touch and stuff, but he'll still more likely to do things that will catch your eye a little bit more with his skills and his flair and bursting past people rather than Mbeumo on the other side. They're very different players, which is why I didn't mind them both being signed. At the detriment of a midfielder, obviously got on my nerves, but that's a different story for another day. And he got Mason Mount, who very similar. What I'm going to say is Cunha and Mason Mount are those players that have become a little bit of a weaker profile, especially in today's Premier League. And I'll call them wingfielders. So wingfielders aren't 10s outright, because they might not have that natural creativity, or maybe it's a work rate issue for certain players, or it's just not, they're not natural 10s in a sense. They prefer their angles to be starting from a wide position and drifting in rather than starting centrally at the point of a midfield three or behind a striker. Because you could class and say that attacking midfielders for the likes of Mason Mount and Cunha, but you wouldn't really call them 10s, would you? If you think about it, really. They're very much the in-betweeners between being a 10 and a wide player. They're wingfielders. And that's actually a profile of player that is find themselves struggling in a Premier League today. I think Florian Wirtz very much fits that. Xavi Simons is another one. There's a couple more that are in my head. Obviously, Cunha, Mount. They almost feel positionless because they're players that you look at and you're like, are you a 10? Are you a winger? Are you an attacking midfielder? What are you? They can do a bit of all of it, but they don't specialise in any. They're more generalist, and it's like they make selections difficult. Because on the surface, you think, oh, they've got utility about them, got versatility. But when you have formations, it actually ends up being the opposite because their fits and almost end up being awkward. Or they need added support from players that they're either playing alongside. If they're playing out wide, they need a fullback that is basically wing back, athletic, can be almost like a joint attacker. And I think that's the reason why it might work with a Sesko, with a Cunha and a Mason Mount, because Dorgu might have to be the left back. I know his output isn't great and he's got better recently, but I don't think you can play Cunha and Mount on the left in a 4-2-3-1 when they're going to have a tendency to drift in. They don't have 1v1 threat. They aren't the quickest off the ball. They're going to need the support of a strong fullback that can do them things. And I think Luke Shaw's days of doing that are numbered. Not even numbered, probably past it. So it would have to be Dorgu. But it's no surprise that you have seen in January that it's been alluded to that United might try and loan a left winger in, which tells you about Ineos's incompetency of adjusting the personnel, selling all the wingers because Amrim didn't play with wingers. Then, which was always a dangerous move when you're tailoring your recruitment too much to a bit of a niche system. Because then you change the system back or the manager leaves and then all of a sudden you don't have a natural left winger in the team. And here we are. And as for the strikers, I think it's a bit easier. Cunha can obviously play there, but his preference isn't to play up front. I think he will still have some games there. But realistically, it's out of Xerxes and Sesko. And I think Sesko's starting to find his feet. And he's still a very intriguing, high potential forward who I don't think has still scratched the surface. And he's starting to show why he has this kind of propensity to be this box threat centre forward that has become a lot more valuable these days, especially for top teams where you need someone to make the difference inside the penalty area when you're playing against teams you're better and that are sitting deep or camping the box. Likes of Erling Haaland, Osimhen. That's why the likes of Darwin Núñez got signed. That's why Havertz has started so many games up front for Arsenal. I think Sesko can be that for us. So I think Sesko's nailed on. But I know the topic of the video or the title of the video was who was our best front three, but it was more me to kind of galaxy brain it a little bit and speak out loud of what I feel like could work and couldn't, because I think the 10 position should be nailed on as Bruno. I think Mason Mount and Cunha could play the 10 as well, but are they really going to displace Bruno? Are they as good as him? I don't think I've seen the creativity, ability and the passing ability. He rarely ever passes anyway, Cunha, to play there. Is he a bit too greedy to play in the 10? Mason Mount is a little bit more creative, but he still isn't natural to him. I feel like he's probably more shoot first, more of a road runner he's become. So for me, I'll just finalise it because I feel like we've spoken a lot, is I think the front three that I'd go with, and it's the same one that I may or may not, you'll have to click on the video and see, because I think it'll depend on games, it'll depend on the games, it'll depend on the opponent. on what our front three will be. It's just about the fact that United don't have many games in the season. We don't have midweek games. It's just the Premier League left. It's one game a week. It's going to be difficult to keep everyone happy, will be the talking point. But I'm going to actually go with, based on performance and what I think could work and be interesting, is I think the front three should be Sesko, Ahmad on the right, and then Mbeumo on the left. I think Mbeumo has the capability of playing there. He's clever enough. And I think Mbeumo playing on the left is going to be the way that I described, where he's almost playing as a second striker, where he's running out to in, playing off a big striker in terms of Sesko, which we had a lot of joy doing for Brentford with Ivan Toney. Even had it with Wissa. He's actually really good at that role, being a second striker. It's almost if you look at the front three of Barcelona under Hansi Flick, you've got Lewandowski up front, Yamal on the right, and you've got Rafinha on the left. And Rafinha is very much a similar mould to Mbeumo in terms of having that ability to be a second striker, where one of their best attributes is their movement in behind, arriving in their box, output machines, goal scorers, sniffing chances out, being in and around the penalty area, central, but when they've started out wide, and just being clever with the pockets they pick up, playing off the big forward. And then outside of him, obviously, they play with like a Balde, which don't get much better than that as attacking, dynamic left-backs. And I think that's where you got to grow Dorgu. He has experience playing forward. He's not always great there, but I feel like he's started to come on. And I think he's still raw, and there's growth for him to go in that game, in that side of his game. So I think Mbeumo off the left, where he can tuck in a little bit and play off Sesko, with Dorgu providing the width, and then you've got Ahmad on the right to provide the 1v1 threat and the technical ability, with Sesko up front and Bruno in the 10. Where because Mbeumo shifts left, Bruno shifts a little bit right in that right half space, which I think is where he's most dangerous, especially being able to kind of whip those crosses in from there, trying to find Sesko. I think there's a really good dynamic to have there. And I think Mason Mount and Cunha will have games where they have to start and a bit of rotation, but based on performance for me and effectiveness, that's what I'd go with. But you let me know what you'd go with. What would be your best attacking front three? What do you think the front three starting week in, week out should be for United? Who makes the cut? Who doesn't? Do United need to go into the market for a left winger? And as the system change causes a bit of a headache. But I'll catch you tomorrow for the review anyway, for Manchester City, which will be Carrick's first game, which is obviously a big one. But remember to like, comment, subscribe. On a road to 10k, I'm almost there. Love yous all, but thanks for tuning in. Hype the video, and I'll see you next time.